purpose of this presentation is to help you achieve a higher band for Module B, Critical Study of Literature, by reflecting on the feedback from the HSC Marking Centre and also considering the feedback from our internal assessment tasks at Cranbrook. It's always important to recap on the rubric. As mentioned in my Module A presentation, and as mentioned I'm sure by your teachers, the rubric shapes the essay questions in the exam. Rather than me reading the rubric to you now, I've highlighted the key terms and words in the rubric, and you can take a moment to pause the presentation and read through the rubric to refresh your memory and familiarise yourself with it again. To simplify the rubric, I've broken it down into some key areas. The rubric emphasises having a depth of understanding with words like detailed, close, rich, analysis, evaluate. There's also a strong focus on you developing a personal response to the literature that you study. Words such as informed, personal interpretation, personal and intellectual connections, critically analyse, considered perspective. Then there's a strong focus on the aesthetics of the text. Textual integrity, distinctive qualities, construction, language composition. And I haven't included this here, but also to an extent its value. Then there's also a focus on broader influences. And I guess quite simply, this is the idea of context or notions of context and how those external factors influence a text composition, and also how it's received in both contemporary and Elizabethan audiences. That's obviously specific to Shakespeare's Henry IV, Part 1. If we're to reflect on the feedback from the 2020 exam, we first need to have a look at the exam question. What's interesting about this exam question is that there's an excerpt that you need to reflect on in your response. The question states, in what ways does this excerpt reflect the concerns and aesthetic qualities of Shakespeare's play? In your response, make close reference to the excerpt and your prescribed text. Of course, it's important to know that when you're asked to reflect on an excerpt from the piece of literature that you've been studying, you need to consider that in, I guess, relation to the entire text. You don't just talk about that excerpt in isolation. I've highlighted in yellow the key words in this question. I think it's fairly obvious in this question. And those key words include what ways, excerpt, concerns, aesthetic qualities, and also later on prescribed text and excerpt again. I think this question really comes down to two keywords though, and these words are concerns and aesthetic qualities, or aesthetic and concerns. The word aesthetics has a definition in the Advanced English Glossary, and it's important to be familiar with the words in this glossary. It defines aesthetics as relating to a sense of beauty or an appreciation of artistic expression. The selection of texts that are recognised as having aesthetic or artistic value is an important focus of the study of literature. The other word that I said was key in this question is this word concerns. And really that's asking you to reflect on the messages that Shakespeare's trying to communicate or bring light to. Essentially, his purpose behind this text. If we have a look at the table here on this slide, on the left-hand side, that column, there are specific words from the question. And then in the right-hand column, I've linked these words to words in the rubric so that you can see the connection and the way in which the rubric shapes the question. I've also put in this right-hand column what the word invites you to explore or prompts you to discuss. So firstly, what ways? Is really wanting you to show a depth of knowledge, to be detailed in your analysis and to reflect on form. The word excerpt prompts you to use the highlighted extract as a starting point to investigate the text as a whole. The word concerns really does invite you to not only look at the context of Elizabethan times, but also a contemporary audience, because of course Shakespeare's text certainly transcends time. It also invites you to consider Shakespeare's purpose. And of course this word aesthetics. It invites you to explore or draw attention to textual integrity, distinctive features, form, artistic value, characters and setting. What are the demands of this question? The HSC Marking Centre have listed what students needed to do well in order to achieve a higher band result. Again, I've highlighted in yellow links to the rubric so that you can see very clear connection between the rubric, the question and markers' expectations. So in their responses, students needed to specifically address the question, develop a strong, sustained personal response to the question, apply knowledge of the module to inform their interpretation and shape their response, have a clear idea of the term aesthetic and its various interpretations in relation to the texts, demonstrate a clear awareness of composer form and context, demonstrate detailed knowledge of the prescribed text, support and develop responses using aptly chosen and detailed textual references from the prescribed text, consider a text's synthesis, unity and cohesion, consider how texts have been received in various contexts, demonstrate a sustained and skillful control of language and ideas. Feedback from the Marking Centre in relation specifically to Henry IV, Part 1. I'm going to give you a moment to pause this presentation and read through this feedback. The final slide in this presentation compares the HSC Marking Centre feedback with the feedback from your most recent internal assessment task. And although both are generalised feedback, I think it's important to look at the crossover so that you know specifically what are the areas of weaknesses and what we need to address if we are to achieve higher band responses. Obviously the question's going to be different this year, but I do think it's interesting to take note of statewide areas of weakness and consider if these might also be areas of weakness for you individually. So let's move through this table. It's interesting that the first point for both our internal assessment task and the HSC Marking Centre is that students need to specifically address the question. And this continues to be a concern, and it is something that will absolutely determine whether or not you achieve a top band result. As mentioned in my previous presentation, there's a common practice of topping and tailing your essays. And what I mean by that is loosely addressing the question in your introduction, but then using a prepared essay in the body of your response, and then again trying to somehow connect your findings to the question in your conclusion. Unfortunately, this just won't cut it. You need to have a sustained response which continues to link back to the question. The next row shows that students still need to have a more thorough understanding of context and linking this context back to their response. The third row, which is something that is often addressed every year, is that students need to prepare more evidence and include analysis of techniques in this case, both dramatic techniques and linguistic techniques, so that you're able to substantiate your points clearly. And this links back to the HSC marking feedback, where there's a very clear focus on explicitly examining the aesthetic features of Shakespearean language in both a dramatic form, but also having a broad range of textual analysis, which helps provide a skillful discussion of the distinctive features of form, character, and setting. The next row, although it is loosely linked, it still shows that in the internal assessment, students needed to be more clear on elements of characters and specifically how. So you really do need to have a thorough understanding of the characters in the text and how those characters help explore the concerns in Shakespeare's play. The next row shows some linked feedback, and this is that you need to create a personal voice. You're responding to the texts in an informed, personal way, but also you're not relying on external sources and critical readings. Of course, these critical readings and external sources are fine to use, but they need to be used with purpose. There are some other points there from our internal assessment task, which you're welcome to take the time to read through. But I hope this has been beneficial for you, and I hope that you take on board the feedback both at statewide level and from an internal assessment perspective.